The marble floors of the U.S. Supreme Court echoed with slow, careful footsteps as lawyers, clerks, and security officers moved into place. Outside, a crowd had gathered. News vans, camera crews, and protesters stood behind metal barricades. Inside, everything was quiet but tight. Everyone knew this case mattered. It wasn't just a ruling. It was a test of balance between security and civil rights, between law and liberty. Most thought it would be business as usual, till Pam Bondi walked in. She hadn't been seen in a courtroom for years. Her fall from public view had been steep scandals, media silence, whispers of deals gone wrong. Some said she was finished. Some said she was forced out. But now she was back. And not just back leading. Whispers floated across the chamber like smoke. Is that Bondi? She's not on the docket, is she? Why her? Wearing a black blazer, hair pulled back, Bondi didn't look for cameras or recognition. She carried only a brown leather file and a simple pen. Her heels clicked once, twice, then silence as she stood at her desk directly facing the bench. At the center of that bench sat Judge Amy Coney Barrett, firm behind her glasses, her robe. Pressed her expression calm as stone. She noticed Bondi too. Their eyes met briefly. A flash of something passed between them, certain, unreadable. But something, then it came. An aide rushed toward Bondi as she was opening her folder to review notes. No words, just a handoff, a plain envelope. She frowned but didn't ask. Her hands opened the flap slowly. Inside was a small black USB drive. It had a label, 2006. Barrett Burton Memo Confidential Bondi Froze. Not for long, but enough for the clerk beside her to notice. She slipped it into her folder without expression, then looked up at the bench. Judge Barrett had already looked away. Pam didn't need to plug it in. She remembered that memo, or at least rumors of it. It was buried during her final year as AG. A legal advisory letter between Barrett and then-Senator Raymond Burton discussing legal boundaries of compassion in national security cases. A strategy memo. Cold, calculated, not meant to ever. Surface, its timing was no accident. The courtroom cameras rolled, live networks were broadcasting, and America was watching. The clerk called the session into order. All rise. Judge Barrett's voice was clear and formal as she opened. Proceedings. This court is now in session. We are here to hear arguments on State of Missouri v. Federal Security Authority regarding the constitutionality of executive digital surveillance expansions enacted under Code 7.3, specifically in relation to public, assembly tracking, and civilian data usage without informed consent. She turned her gaze to the counsel tables. Counsel, please state your appearance. Pam stood. Pamela Jo Bondi, representing petitioners. There it was. Official. The internet caught fire instantly. Social media erupted. Hashtag Pam Bondi returns. Hashtag Supreme Showdown. Hashtag Bondi vs. Barrett. But inside the chamber, the air was thick. The government's defense counsel started first, confident, brief, technical. They used acronyms, reports, and abstract threats. Nothing emotional, nothing human. Then it was her turn. Pam Bondi walked slowly to the podium. She didn't look at the camera. She looked at the bench. Your Honors, she began, this is not just a legal question. It's a human one. Her voice was measured, not dramatic, but clear, cold. Air seemed to flow through her words. She didn't start with the Constitution. She started with a 16-year-old girl named Marissa, high school student from Detroit, whose phone data was swept up in a federal dragnet and used to block her from boarding a school trip to D.C. because her group text mentioned the word march. Her parents weren't radicals, Bondi said. They were teachers. Her tone stayed steady. They filed 10 appeals and never got an answer because they never even got a charge. She glanced at Barrett just once. And yet, the precedent that enabled that silence came from this very bench. Barrett didn't flinch. Bondi continued. She didn't raise her voice. She sharpened it. She cited legal scholars. She brought up contradictions in federal code. Then, carefully, she pulled a printed quote from Barrett's own 2012 lecture at Notre Dame. In times of fear, Bondi read aloud, "The temptation to overreach is not a sign of strength but a test of our legal soul." She paused. "Your words, Your Honor." The room was silent. Barrett's eyes twitched, barely. Bondi went further. She asked how legal overreach had become standard. Protocol. She asked what kind of democracy used fear to erase rights. And she never stopped locking eyes with the bench. At one point, a court observer dropped their pen. The sound echoed. Finally, she turned to her final page. She looked down, then closed the file instead. "No one is asking this court to surrender. National defense," she said. "We are asking it to remember its duty to defend the people." She stepped away, quiet. No theatrics. Barrett blinked. Just once. Then leaned forward, hands pressed together. Her voice came slower this time. "Ms. Bondi," she said, "your presentation will be reviewed. This court thanks you for your passion." Bondi nodded once. "Thank you, Your Honor." As she walked back to her table, she could feel it, not applause, not fear. Something else. Respect. And something deeper. Uncertainty. Behind Barrett's eyes, a storm had begun. And the USB drive in Bondi's folder remained untouched. For now, the courtroom recessed briefly after Pam Bondi's opening argument. Cameras cut to commercial. Inside, the silence lingered. People whispered, but not too loud. Something had shifted. What was supposed to be another dry federal hearing now felt more like a trial for the soul of the system itself. Pam stayed seated, calm on the outside. Inside, her mind was spinning. The flash drive in her folder, it burned against the leather like a loaded weapon. She hadn't used it yet. She didn't have to. Not yet. But the moment was coming. Across from her, Judge Amy Coney Barrett sat back in her chair, face blank. But her fingers tapped her bench lightly, an old, nervous habit. Cameras didn't pick that up, but Bondi noticed. So did one of Barrett's clerks, who leaned in, whispered something in her ear. Barrett nodded slowly. Whatever was said, it didn't look routine. Back on air, the defense had their turn again. Their lead counsel, Edward Langley, delivered his rebuttal with practiced confidence. He tried to paint Bondi's argument as emotionally compelling but legally fragile. He said this court cannot be swayed by sentiment. The government operates under clear and necessary powers in times of digital threat. Bondi didn't interrupt. But when it was her turn again, she didn't go back to the podium. She asked permission to stay seated while addressing the court. Barrett allowed it almost too quickly. Pam leaned slightly forward, voice lower, almost conversational. "You speak of threat," she said. "I'd like to speak of silence." She pulled out a single printed page. It wasn't from law books. It was a military complaint form declassified, dated 2007. It told of a retired NSA analyst who resigned after realizing her own daughter's texts had been flagged in a federal keyword filter. It was filed, ignored, buried. "And this isn't a one-off," Bondi continued. "This is a pattern. First it's convenience, then compliance, then control." Barrett's lips pressed together. Bondi noticed. She changed direction. She pulled out a different document this time. It's part of a 2014 academic paper co-authored by Barrett during her university tenure. The paper explored moral elasticity in post-9/11's legal environments. It supported caution over trust. "Your Honor," Bondi said gently, "you once argued that the law must serve justice, not efficiency. Did that change?" A ripple passed through the room. This was no longer legal debate. It was personal. Barrett sat up straighter. She responded, voice level. "Counselor, this court is not here to judge ideology. It's here to interpret law." Bondi didn't flinch. "I agree." But what happens when the law begins to reflect ideology, not rights? Barrett started to speak, then paused. Pam saw it. It's a crack in the wall. She reached slowly into her folder. The flash drive. She held it up without plugging it in. Barrett's eyes widened slightly. Bondi said this was sent to me anonymously. It contains what appears to be a confidential memo dated 2006, authored by then-advisor Amy Barrett and Senator Raymond Burton. Barrett didn't move, Bondi continued. I have not opened the file, but I would like to submit it for sealed review with the court's permission. A hush fell over the room. No one expected that. Not the defense, not the public, not even the media. Barrett cleared her throat. On what grounds? Bondi didn't blink. On the grounds that the contents may directly relate to the intellectual origin of current federal legal strategies regarding public surveillance, and may reveal a conflict of consistency between public rulings and private advisories. The words landed hard. Barrett paused. The court will consider. Pam sat back. She had made her move. For the first time, Barrett looked uncertain. The court recessed again. Emergency consultation. Behind the scenes, Barrett and two justices left the chamber in whispers. Behind closed doors. Inside the courtroom, media whispers filled the silence. Pam sat still. She didn't smile. Her hand touched the flash drive lightly. One of the defense clerks leaned over to Langley. She's not bluffing. Langley shook his head. She's playing deeper than we thought. Outside headlines. We're already updating. Breaking. Bondi submits sealed memo, allegedly. Tied to Barrett Supreme Court in shock. What's in the 2006 memo? Trends worldwide 10 minutes past. The morning headlines were brutal. Pam Bondi challenges Supreme Integrity sealed memo rocks legal world. What is the Barrett-Burton memo? D.C. goes silent. Judiciary crisis or political theater. Across newsrooms, podcasts, and cable networks, everyone was talking about the same thing. What was on that flash drive? Speculation spread fast. Some claimed it was a legal opinion that gave quiet approval to mass surveillance during the early days of post-9/11's America. Others whispered it was political, something about Senator Raymond Burton's long-dead but controversial bills. Written with Barrett's guidance back when she was just a legal consultant, but no one knew for sure. Not yet. Back in D.C., the Supreme Court's inner halls were tense. Security had been doubled. Reporters were barred from the second floor. Judge Amy Coney Barrett's chambers remained sealed, her calendar cleared. Of all non-essential meetings, she hadn't spoken publicly since the session. But her clerks noticed a change. She stayed later, ate little, made no jokes, and spent hours reading. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi was holding her ground. She didn't speak to media, despite dozens of offers, not even a tweet. Her team issued only one short statement. The matter is now in the court's hands. We trust the system will hold. But the truth was, Pam didn't trust the system. Not anymore. In a quiet room at a downtown D.C. hotel, she sat at a small table with just one other person, retired Judge Malcolm Raines, her old mentor. Someone who had left the bench in protest nearly a decade ago after the first wave of domestic surveillance reforms passed with little oversight. He looked at her across the table. His face was calm, but his voice was sharp. You know, they'll come for you now, he said. Pam nodded. I know. Then why push it? She pulled out a small notebook, tapped it gently. 'Cause that memo, she said, it's not just a footnote in history. It's the start of all this. These loopholes. The legal justification for watching citizens collecting data without a shred of accountability. Barrett helped draft it. You haven't even read it, he replied. I didn't need to. The person who sent it to me did. And who was that? Pam's jaw tightened. Anonymous, but smart. They didn't just send the memo. They sent audio too. A conversation, private, from 2006. Raines leaned forward. You still have it? She nodded. He looked down for a moment, then said, "You realize what happens if this gets out? If it shows Barrett knowingly shaped this policy and then ruled in its favor on the bench, she'll be forced to recuse. Maybe more." He gave a half smile. "You always did like setting fires?" Pam leaned back. "Only if it means we stop pretending this system isn't rigged." Across town, in a heavily secured room within the Judiciary Ethics Review Office, a small group of trusted legal inspectors began the process of verifying the flash drive's contents. It didn't take long to confirm its authenticity. The memo was real. So was the audio, and it was worse than many feared. The memo laid out a strategy: how to craft legal language that could give the executive branch broad surveillance rights without triggering constitutional challenges. But more damning was the recording Barrett. In a quiet conversation with Senator Burton, suggesting ways to narrow definitions of public space to expand federal monitoring zones, one sentence stood out. "We redefine consent through geography," Barrett had said. "We eliminate the need to notify." It wasn't illegal, but it was ethically explosive, especially from a sitting Supreme Court justice. Within 24 hours, internal reports were leaking. By the time the Supreme Court resumed the next morning, the air outside the building was electric. Protesters lined the sidewalk. Police in riot gear stood along the stairs. Everyone had a phone out. Everyone was streaming. Inside, the justices filed in silently. Barrett was last. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Chief Justice Roberts addressed the court. "There is new material under review. The court will delay oral arguments pending findings by the Independent Review Board. Until such time, Justice Barrett will voluntarily step back from proceedings related to State of Missouri, VFS." Gasps echoed. Barrett didn't blink. She looked straight ahead. But to those watching closely, she seemed smaller. Not weaker, just more human. Pam didn't smile. She nodded slightly and resumed her seat. Her team knew she'd scored a win. But she also knew this wasn't over. After court, a note was left in her hotel room. No signature, just one sentence typed. "You opened the first door. The rest won't open quietly." She read it twice, then burned it in the sink. Outside, as she walked past reporters, someone shouted, "Ms. Bondi, will you release the full memo?" She paused only for a second, then answered, "That's not my job. That's the court's job." And now they can't look away. The truth was loose, and the silence. It had shattered Colon the next morning. Headlines across every major network were united by one theme: the memo that shook the bench. News anchors debated ethics while law professors were called in to explain legal conflicts of interest in real time. Even late-night comedians treaded carefully. But on Capitol Hill, things moved fast and quietly. By 9 a.m., Senator Albrecht, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, called for an emergency bipartisan meeting. His words were measured, but the meaning was clear. The independence of our courts is sacred. If there has been any compromise, we will act. Behind closed doors, the political knives were being sharpened. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi stayed in the shadows. She refused all interview requests. Her team received over 20 offers from CNN to Fox to Al Jazeera. She turned them all down. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the truth to finish its work without interference. But the pressure was building. That afternoon, her hotel received a bomb threat. Evacuation followed. No device was found, but the message was clear: back off. Back in her new secure location, an anonymous townhouse in a Georgetown alley, Bondi sat in silence, reviewing her next move. She stared at the unplayed portion of the audio file from the flash drive. The first half had already changed everything, but there were still 10 minutes left, and she hadn't listened to it. Not yet. Not until now. She hit play. Barrett's voice filled the room, clear and sharp. "I'm only helping with the language, Senator. If they try to pin this on me, it won't stick." Then Burton's deep, gravelly voice responded, "That's why we need your cover, Amy. No one questions a scholar, least of all a future justice. There was silence, then a final sentence from Barrett. Then, let's make sure history forgets I was ever in the room. Pam closed her eyes. That sentence wasn't just legal strategy. 'Twas legacy management. 'Twas a lie. That night, a major leak appeared on a secure whistleblower platform hosted on servers in Iceland. The full memo. The full audio. No source, no watermark. It spread like wildfire. Redacted sections previously blacked out were restored, showing direct connections between Barrett, Burton, and early legal frameworks for digital surveillance and predictive AI policy. One clause even mentioned a defense contractor later linked to controversial foreign operations in Syria. The implications were now geopolitical. World leaders began issuing statements. The UK Prime Minister called it deeply concerning. Germany's Chancellor demanded transparency. The UN Human Rights Council called an emergency media briefing. Back in Washington, the White House press secretary held a grim, tightly managed conference. We do not interfere with the judicial process, but we urge the Supreme Court to act. With transparency, public trust must be restored. Barrett remained silent, but inside the Supreme Court, a fracture had formed. Some just as quietly at first began circulating internal memos suggesting Barrett consider stepping aside permanently. Others refused, arguing that media pressure must not dictate judicial tenure. The court's unity, usually invisible, but ironclad, was falling apart. Late that evening, Pam received an encrypted message from a contact only known as Orion. She hadn't heard from him in 5 years. Not since her last whistleblower case with the Florida Department of State. The message was short, "You're not done." The memo was just part of it. Check the FSA archive folder 33B. You'll find what Burton really funded in 2012 and who signed off on it. She sat still for a moment, heart pounding. The FSA Federal Surveillance Authority was defunct, disbanded in 2015 after multiple lawsuits. But its archives were supposedly sealed by executive order. Supposedly, she called her tech analyst Maya, former NSA contractor turned privacy activist. If anyone could get into a sealed system without leaving a trace, it was Maya. 3 hours later, Pam had it. Folder 33B. Inside, a trail of funding requests and approvals. All linked to black budget projects, covert monitoring programs that weren't just domestic. One file was labeled Operation Penumbra, Geneva Liaison Date. March 2012 signatures. Raymond Burton. And underneath it initials, ACB, Amy Coney Barrett. Back then, she hadn't been a judge. She'd been a legal advisor for a private national security group that quietly funneled legislative language to both House and Senate committees. And now, as a Supreme Court justice, she had ruled on cases touching those very frameworks without ever disclosing her past involvement. The legal conflict was no longer theoretical. It was real and possibly criminal. Pam closed the files, sealed them into an external drive, and called her only remaining ally inside the Department of Justice deputy, Ag Rami Velasquez. He picked up on the second ring. That morning, a gray fog hung over Washington, D.C., as if the city itself sensed the storm approaching. Pam Bondi stood in front of the Department of Justice's side entrance, dressed in a simple navy suit, her expression unreadable. Inside, her briefcase, secured with both encryption and a physical lock, was the drive labeled 33B Penumbra. Deputy Attorney General Rami Velasquez met her just past the metal detectors, walking swiftly but saying nothing. He led her down a narrow corridor, away from cameras, away from chatter. They entered a soundproof conference room usually reserved for classified briefings. He closed the door. "You brought it?" he asked. Pam nodded and placed the drive. "On the table. Need you to understand what's in here before you look," she said. Rami sat. "Then tell me." She took a breath. Barrett's involvement with Operation Penumbra wasn't just advisory. There's funding approvals, communications, and 2 legal assessments with her signature. She wasn't background, score structural. And then she ruled on cases tied to those policies without ever recusing herself. Ami blinked slowly. His calm demeanor cracked just enough to reveal tension. If this is true, he said, it could collapse the integrity of the bench, not just Barrett, the entire confirmation process. Every ruling she touched. Pam leaned forward. I didn't come here to blow up the court. I came here to stop the cover-up. The moment she laughed in my face during that hearing, I knew something was wrong. But this is systemic. This is a shadow network hiding behind judicial robes. Rami inserted the drive into a secure DOJ computer terminal. As he scrolled through the files, the colors slowly drained from his face. 10 minutes later, he looked up. These documents aren't just explosive, he said. They're radioactive. If we release them unfiltered, the public trust will collapse. If we bury them, we're accomplices. Pam nodded. So we don't do either. We investigate. Quietly, cleanly, independently. Rami stared at her. Do you trust anyone else to help us? No, she said, but I know who they'll send to stop us. He leaned back. Then we better move fast. That night, a sealed directive went out under the DOJ's internal security protocol. A task force was created under the title Judicial Ethics Emergency Review with only 3 members. No leaks, no press, no contact. Pam would be their lead investigator. But word was already seeping through cracks. Somehow, someone knew. Because 3 hours later, Maya, the tech analyst who had retrieved the folder, vanished. Her apartment was untouched. Laptop gone. No sign of struggle. It's just a sticky note on the fridge that read, "Nothing ever disappears. It just moves." Pam read the note herself after security cleared the apartment. She didn't run. She said to Rami, who stood beside her. No, he said grimly. She was taken or warned. Pam's eyes darkened. We don't have much time. Over the next 48 hours, the internal investigation began pulling threads. They discovered former aides who had worked under Barrett during her early advisory days. Some were willing to speak off the record. Others disappeared from public view within hours of being contacted. One, an academic from Notre Dame, emailed Pam a single line. She always knew where the loopholes were. She just stopped calling. Then by the end of the week, the task force had built a chain of evidence long enough to justify an official motion, one that would force the Supreme Court itself to confront its own. The motion was titled Request for Ethics Review and Temporary Suspension of Judicial Capacity. Justice Amy Coney Barrett. It was historic, unprecedented, and deadly serious. The plan was to deliver it directly to Chief Justice Roberts through formal legal procedure, but before they could. A story broke on a fringe media site with known intelligence ties. Bondi's vendetta, weaponizing justice against the Supreme. Court. The article accused Pam of being politically motivated, carrying a personal grudge, and conspiring with foreign elements to destabilize U.S. legal institutions. It claimed she forged the Barrett-Burton documents using AI deepfakes, an accusation as baseless as it was strategic. Pam watched the report in silence, then turned to Rami. This is what they do, she said. Destroy the messenger before the truth lands. But she had one more move. She called for a live press conference. The press, already starved for a statement, flooded the steps of the DOJ's administrative wing the next morning. At exactly 10 a.m., Pam Bondi stepped up to the podium. She didn't smile. She didn't read from notes. She looked straight into the cameras and said, "This is not political. This is not personal. This is about the truth." And the truth is that one of the highest judges in our nation helped build a system that watches our people, then ruled to protect it from challenge without ever admitting she had a hand in it. That is not justice. That is manipulation. And today I'm submitting a formal request for a full ethics review and a temporary suspension of Justice Barrett's active rulings until these matters are resolved. The world went quiet. Within an hour, the New York Times broke the full story. Within 4 hours, the Supreme Court's press office confirmed receipt of the motion. And within 12 hours, 3 former clerks publicly supported the review. The fire had spread beyond control. Pam returned to her apartment late that night, exhausted, body heavy but her mind still alert. There, waiting on her kitchen table, was a single envelope, no postage, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence typed on old letterhead. "You opened the court's door. Now step carefully before it closes on you." Pam stared at it for a long time, then set it on fire in her sink. The fight was no longer about law. It was about who controlled the truth and who would be left standing when it was done burning. The next morning, Supreme Court security was quietly elevated. Staff were told it was a standard threat response, but whispers told a different story. Armed marshals were posted outside chambers. Senior clerks were told to limit communication with media. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett had not been seen in public for 36 hours. Inside the court's historic halls, behind doors not meant to open, an emergency judicial ethics session was called. No cameras, no press. Only 9 justices, sworn staff, and a single printed copy of the motion Pam Bondi had submitted. Chief Justice John Roberts presided. His tone was grim, his words precise. "This court has never faced an accusation of this magnitude. The integrity of our institution rests on our response." Barrett, seated across from him, said nothing. Her face remained unreadable. When asked if she wished to respond before review proceedings advanced, she simply replied, "I will make my statement in writing. I am innocent of all allegations." But the silence between the justices said more than her words. Trust had cracked. And cracks in the highest court don't heal easily. Meanwhile, across the city, Pam Bondi was preparing for war. Her team had just decrypted a second set of files linked to Operation Penumbra. These weren't funding records. They were field reports briefings from overseas cyberops carried out under the pretext of national defense. They detailed silent information warfare against not just foreign actors, but domestic targets, activists, journalists, and opposition researchers. And the kicker: one of the blacklisted names in 2013 was Pam Bondi. Rami Velasquez stared at the file in disbelief. "You were on the list," he said slowly. "You were never supposed to survive this far." Pam looked tired but fierce. They made a mistake. They left the wrong person standing. The DOJ task force decided to go public with part of the intel. Not everything, just enough to prove that Barrett's signature was involved in domestic surveillance decisions and subsequent rulings that shielded those programs. Enough to justify the temporary suspension they were requesting. Pam was invited to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee in a special closed-door session. She walked into the Capitol flanked by security, carrying a red folder marked "Classified Auth Velasquez." Doge, the hearing lasted 5 hours. No leaks came from the room, but what emerged afterward changed the game. Senator Albrecht gave a rare bipartisan statement on the Capitol steps. "Based on what we've seen, the committee formally supports a judicial review. And we ask Justice Barrett to step aside voluntarily while the review is conducted." That statement alone was unprecedented. But the fallout hit harder than anyone. Expected by evening, the president gave a national address. Standing at the podium in the White House briefing room, she chose her words with care. "I will not speak to guilt or innocence. But I support accountability. The rule of law is only strong when it holds even those at the top." The country was stunned. Protests erupted in front of the Supreme Court building, some in support of Barrett, others demanding full removal. In the chaos, one detail was missed. A classified request had been made to the Federal Security Oversight Board, sealed, marked top-level request for emergency inquiry. wasn't filed by Pam. It was filed by Rami Velasquez, and it contained a name few in Washington had seen in years. Raymond Burton, the ghost from the past, the original architect of Operation Penumbra, and Barrett's early mentor. That night, Pam received an anonymous email. Subject line, "You're close. Too close." The body contained only one thing, a link to an encrypted folder and a password. She clicked it, entered the code. Inside a single audio file. She hit play. It was Burton's voice. Snow crunched under Pam Bondi's boots as she stepped off the last chopper. The air in the Swiss Alps was sharp and silent. The coordinates from the encrypted message had led her here an unmarked facility buried into the side of a mountain. Near Geneva, no guards, no cameras. Just a steel door built into the rock, blinking with biometric sensors. Beside her stood Rami Velasquez, face pale, eyes alert. Behind them, two trusted agents from the DOJ's CyberOps team scanned the area. Pam approached the panel and pressed her palm to it. To her shock, it beeped once and unlocked. "They expected you," Rami murmured. The door opened into darkness. Then dim lights flickered any hallway of concrete and silence. At the end, a vault-like chamber. Inside, screens, drives, paper files, and an old mainframe marked Cifra node. Primary archive, it was all here. The Geneva Protocols. The blacklisted citizen surveillance programs. Evidence of foreign corporate lobbying within the U.S. judiciary system. But the worst of it, what made Pam step back in disbelief, was a file titled Succession, Judicial. Profiles for Algorithmic Governance Integration. It was a chart. Not just of sitting judges, but future candidates. Marked not by credentials, but by behavioral predictability, loyalty, probability, and AI compatibility scores. It was the blueprint of a judiciary to be programmed, not elected, not appointed. "Good God," Rami whispered. "This isn't about law. It's about total governance through engineered consent." Pam's breath caught in her throat. All this time, the Barrett case was a mask. She was just a test. The real game was the replacement. A soft beep interrupted them. A screen lit up. Incoming transmission. Off-level Omega voice, only Pam. Hesitated, then nodded to the tech. The line opened. A voice came through. Calm, male. "British Ms. Bondi. If you've reached this room, then we've failed to dissuade you." "That's unfortunate." She stepped closer. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I helped build the court behind the court. And you're standing in its heart. Congratulations, you've uncovered it." Pam's eyes narrowed. Why hide? This. Why Barrett? Why now? The voice replied smoothly. "Because the world has changed. Governance through votes is inefficient. Emotion clouds judgment. The law must evolve. We needed someone with influence to protect the transition. Barrett was imperfect, but useful. You were never meant to survive the first leak, yet here you are. So what happens now?" The voice chuckled faintly. "Now, you have a choice. Take the data. Expose it. The chaos will destroy institutions overnight or walk away. The world keep believing in order, in courts, in rules. Either way, we win. Truth alone isn't enough to save a system. It only burns it." The line went dead. Pam turned to Rami. Her jaw tightened. "No," she said. "They don't get to. Write the ending." Back in Washington, chaos had already begun to swell. Despite Barrett's quiet resignation, the media war exploded. Fringe news claimed she was the victim of a political coup. Others defended her exit as an act of integrity. Leaks of the succession files began appearing anonymously across dark forums. But Pam stayed silent. She met with the president behind closed doors. Not in an office, but in the White House residence. No press, no aides, just two women and a single flash drive. When it was over, the president said quietly, "I'll protect the Republic. But we'll need to do it in pieces. Quietly, carefully. This can't be handled by the court. Not yet. Pam nodded. Then let's build something better. And make sure no one like Barrett gets that close again. A week later, a closed congressional hearing began, sealed from the public, but filled with lawmakers shaken by what they saw. Barrett herself did not return to the U.S. Her last known location was Zurich. Then she vanished. Some say she was offered protection in exchange for silence. Others believe she returned to the architects of the system she helped create. Pam never confirmed either way. She returned to private life, quietly, but not to rest. She started something new, a watchdog network of former federal attorneys, intelligence analysts, and investigative reporters. Its name was simple: Glass Court. Its mission: track judicial influence systems before they grow too deep to uproot. In her first and only public statement after the case, Pam said, "We've spent too long pretending our systems were immune to the very power games we once condemned. What I saw in that courtroom wasn't just a crack in the lid, was a mirror. If we want justice, we have to fight for it from the inside." And so ended one battle, but not the war. Because somewhere in a quiet server farm in Central Europe, a backup of Succession 2.0 recompiled itself automatically. New names, new scores, and a blinking cursor at the bottom of the file waiting to assign the next key player. Only one thing was certain: the court was still being built. But now it knew it was being watched.